again in this new year. Happy New Year, everybody. 2024, eh? Where does the time go? I don't know. Anyway, it seems like no time at all since we did our last White Dwarf look, but we're going to do another one because it's another month. And I've got some fun things coming up in the next couple of weeks, so we won't have a chance in the next couple of weeks. So we're going to do one now. Okay, now we are going to look at two White Dwarfs today. But my apologies to the people who like the 1980s dwarf. We're going to look at two 90s edition White Dwarfs. And the reason for this is that owing to an oversight on my part, I don't actually have the January 1986 is where we are now, right? Got to check the year ahead. That's right. 1991, yes. 1996. Yes. I don't have January 1986. It falls. It's an issue that falls between two folders that I keep stuff in. So I move straight from one folder onto the other folder and realise that I don't have that one. If I'd noticed a couple of months ahead, or even a couple of weeks ahead, I might have tried to get hold of a copy, but I didn't notice until I came to get it out of the folder, because I thought that was a continuous run. Anyway, no worries. What we're going to do then is look at January 1991 and January 1996. So you'll get two White Dwarfs anyway. But if you're more fan of the roleplay White Dwarfs, then maybe skip this video. Maybe this one isn't for you. Anyway, let's get started. Here we go then. With apologies from the shine on the cover, I'll try and lift these up. Hopefully the pages inside are a bit less shiny, so they won't reflect quite so much, but I'll lift these up so that you can see them. We're going to start off with this one. This is issue 133. This is White Dwarf January 1991. This is £1.50 if you're in the UK. It's $3.95 if you're in the States. Obviously there was a much better exchange rate at that time, and 7 Deutschmarks. Oh, 7.8 Deutschmarks. What's the lower number of Deutschmarks anyway? 7.8 if you're in West Germany. And we are ploughing straight into an article on orc mechaniacs, those crazy orky tech boys who make all of the weird gits, the weird gizmos for the gits, including the battle wagons and the weapons, and keep everything going. And here is a set of cards, like a sort of sub card game that you can play in amongst your games, so that before the game you draw some cards. These are the things that your mech has had a chance to attend to before the game, so you can, if you get a malfunction or something, you can use one of these. You can use some of these tools, appropriate tools of course, like a hammer, to fix the problem. But your opponent also gets to draw some malfunction cards before the game, so that if a hit from, let's say, a plasma gun is successful, and they have the right malfunction card, they can play that to nullify it, and force the mech to use up their tools to fix the malfunction before the shot can be fired. Quite a fun little game. Advert Fantasy Miniatures, that good old Golden Demon compendium, which maybe we should take a look at some point as well, because that's excellent. It's got some really good miniatures in it, of course. And the shock attack gun, continuing the mechs article. This is one of the more interesting weapons in 40k. It creates a portal which sends snotlings hurtling through the warp inside the Terminator armor, or inside the vehicle, or inside of whatever person it's aimed at, provided that the mech is on target. It has some quite fun tables here for the various effects that the snotling can cause if it materializes inside your armor. It's particularly horrific should it materialise inside a helmet next next to a Terminator's head and start gnawing his eyeballs out. But there are also things that are less positive for the Snotling if they turn up in unhospitable environments. And a little bit on walk bikes there, wrapping up. Here's Colin Dixon. This is appropriate. You may know Colin passed away late last year, and I was unaware that I'd met Colin Dixon actually, but until a friend of mine showed a photograph that he'd taken of me and Colin together at Salute, and I had just been completely unaware that that's who he was. So that's a bit sad, missed opportunity. But yes, here's welcoming Colin Dixon to the team as a sculptor, having been painting with GW for a while. And Roy Eastland's some of his painting jobs here, including on these skeletons. I'm not so very familiar with those skeletons. There's some fun things here. Here we have some more rules for Mighty Empires, Pirate, Ocean Weather Chart, moving over open sea tiles, and also some rules for, or some missions rather, for Space Hulk. Genestealer invasion rules, missions, get that word right. Using some of the tiles from Deathwing and Genestealer, so not so very useful if you don't have those. You need these big open rooms, but some extras for that. Another glorious modelling workshop here, looking at making fences. Your standard balsa wood strip fences, walls with card, and of course your obligatory odd square cut on to represent a rough cut wall, and then texture stippled over the top of it to give these very classic looking 90s Games Workshop walls. Hedges from, in this case, steel wool, also done similarly with pan scourers, but in this case that's some steel wool or wire wool hedges. Here is a look at some of those entries from previous Golden Demons, but mostly advertising for submissions for the next Golden Demon, Golden Demon 91. So new Warlord Titan weapons and equipment. Of course, the heads and the weapon mounts and the various tails and things that were sculpted as metal add-ons for those plastic Warlord Titans. There's an assortment of the newly sculpted Titan heads, and I'm sure we'll be looking at those at the end of the magazine. Here are these lovely Slaneshi pastel coloured Titans. These are in the cabinets at Foundry, so nice to see those in a photograph. Odd to see one turned that way in the context of White Dwarf. Normally the only one that does that is the one on the back cover, but yeah, maybe they needed to fill up a whole page with it anyway. And here's John Blanche's discussion of the various early metal pages in this issue. A look at 3 Marauder special offers. So you can have a 2,000 point Dark Elf army, a 2,000 point Orc and Goblin army, or a 2001 Space Odyssey army, point Dwarf army, made up of entirely Marauder miniatures, some of which of course later got subsumed back into the main Games Workshop range. And these are available for a particularly bargainous price, which we will see towards the back. And on now to Marienburg. Now this is not the first one in the series looking at Marienburg for Hammer Fantasy Roleplayers. It says welcome once more to Marienburg and Potion Square on Leudenhoek. Maybe that's how you say it, I don't know. I'm not very good with the pronunciation of this, but Leudenhoek is, I guess, how I would say it. This being an ongoing series of articles looking at particular buildings and people and places around this Marienburg in general, and this one particular, is it called the The Suidock, Suidock, Suiddock, Suidock, South Dock, I guess, probably is what that would mean. And Potion Square in particular here. And this one is going to be looking at the Watch House, which is this one here. Is that right? Yes, this one here, the Watch House. And the particular watchmen who are at home there. They're not Sergeant Colon and Nobby Nobs. You'd be forgiven for thinking that. They are slightly different, but I guess I would probably be inclined to run them maybe that way. But anyway, one of them is a straight cop and one of them is a bent cop. And then some various suggestions as to what bylaws might be in place around Marienburg and how they might affect the players. Dr. Marcus Putlangs, who runs a cheap a cheap surgery, which you might not want to go to unless you really don't have the money to afford anything else. And Old Mother Crumhorn, who everyone thinks is a witch, and who may possibly be a witch. I'm not going to spoil that for you. But she lives on Potion Square as well. So I really like this series of articles. The Marienburg articles, these are some of my favourite, just for the kind of character, the depth that's gone into. I think there is a Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay supplement that gathers all of this material together. I can't remember what it's called. It's not the City one, I don't think. That's Middenheim. Anyway, there is a supplement that gathers all of this information together, and that would be well worth picking up. Some really lovely, flavourful stuff in there. Here's some 40k warbands, some Goth warbands, or armies. In fact, these are sort of 1,000-point warbands that you can mix together into your armies, and you're looking at here £34 for 42 plastic orcs and 21 metal orcs, £53 for 24 plastic orcs, 32 metal orcs, 1 shock attack gun, and 90 snotlings. 90 snotlings. Why on earth? Because it's a runt herd of 200 points, 1 runt bot, 10 snotlings. That's crazy. 90 snotlings. Really? Don't know. £33 for 30 plastic orcs, 11 metal orcs, 3 warbikes, 1 buggy. They all sound insanely cheap now, of course, but back in the day, that was probably a fair whack. Here are those mech boys in the orc shock attack gun. Look at some of those confrontation gangs. Remember, we were looking at confrontation last month. They brought out how to build your gangs, and here's an assortment of tech, bounty hunter, and scavvy and brat gang leaders or gangers with the various plastic arms that you might want to pick up for them. Here's that Imperial Battle Titan, the plastic Titan frame with all of these new Titan heads that are available, designed by Colin Dixon, of course. Some Terminators for your runt bots, your snotlings rather, to appear inside, or for you to play in the Gene Stealer campaign, of course. Good old Space Marine armour variants. These are slightly different armour variants, I think, to the ones that appeared later on, but the Thunder Armour one is still the same, and that's still my favourite of the armors. And here's those skeletons and those Norse dwarfs from earlier. So it doesn't actually say the prices of those Marauder. I thought it did. I was pretty sure that there was a thing that said how much those were, just because it would be interesting to know. Oh yes, it does say. It does say. It says in the yellow. £50 for 78 Dark Elves and 4 Warhounds, plus a free Dark Clawed and Death Dealer on cold ones. £50 for 40 Warriors, 20 Crossbowmen, 10 Giant Slayers, 10 Troll Slayers, and 1 Organ Gun with a free cannon and 5 crew, and that of course still being the best dwarf cannon ever, the siege gun. And £70 for 40 orcs, 10 orc ball riders, 46 goblins, 1 man mangler with a free man mangler, so that's 2 man manglers, and a wolf drawn chariot in it there. So pretty good prices. Should you have that cash at your disposal in 1991. And here are some of those marauder forces on the table, the Dark Elves versus the goblins, with of course the goblin fanatics there breaking maybe a little early from their unit. I don't know if that distance is quite the distance required to send out the fanatics, but there you go. These ones are they're not my favourite. They're not my favourite goblin fanatics. I don't have any of these in my home. In fact, I haven't really seen any of these available anywhere, so I don't know if anyone was particularly keen. But there's some lovely models on both sides in the regular armies. Okay, there we go. So quick look through 1991. Let us turn to the glorious nostalgia. That is 1996. I was going to get that wrong because the date has changed. Yes, 1996 is where we are. Okay, Angels of Death on the cover here. Not as I had previously thought, because this is when the Angels of Death actually came out. We've seen those in previous White Dwarf articles. They came out quite a long time before this, the models, but for a different reason, which we will, I'm sure, discover as we go through. Here's the contents. There we go. That's why, because Codex Angels of Death was released this month. So now this is Blood Angels and Dark Angels got their own Space Marine Codex, and that's the cover. That's why that's on the cover. It's a bit more on Shadow of the Horned Rat, a competition no less, to win yourself a copy of that. Here's the Perry twins in full medieval regalia at a reenactment before, sadly, Michael lost one of his hands to one of the cannons they were manning. Discussion of the Hellhound, another kit of metal bits to go on your plastic chimera. Some discussion of rules and formation of platoons there. On to Warhammer Quest. And here we are discussing using blank monster cards to create your own monster deck based on the monsters that you have in your own collection, plus tailoring those decks and theming them to give you a particular makeup of monsters, so that you're not just going into a random dungeon every time. You're going into more specifically an Orc's lair, or you're going more specifically into a Skaven nest, or perhaps a particular geographical feature or a certain mission is dictating what creatures you're going to encounter on your journey through the dark. Here we have an interview with Andy Chambers, no stranger to White Dwarf, but perhaps we need to know a bit more about him. And this article is particularly significant to me because it was the first time that I came across this picture of Andy's Screaming Bell, which is far cooler as a model than what eventually came out. And this is just made out of some plastic card and some skeleton chariot wheels and some other plastic wheels and a Christmas bell. So have you had any decorations for all of your tree over Christmas? Do you have any plastic bells spare, or before they go back in the box, nab yourself one of these, make yourself one of these cool Screaming Bells. And these Skaven pulling them are the Blood Bowl Skaven with some hoods puttied over, which is why I wanted a Blood Bowl Skaven team to be pulling my Screaming Bell. But I couldn't get hold of these models, they're too expensive, so I had to sculpt my own. Oh well, what a shame. Lots of his conversions in this article. There's some converted Death Guard down here. Converted Redemptionists here from the Disciples of the Red Redemption, which I'm sure is no accident in naming. not converted, or at least with some mutations converted amongst it, but his Skaven Blood Bowl team. The notorious dog soldiers, the Goliath gang, again converted because Goliath miniatures didn't exist, or there are a couple in there, mostly converted from Space Marine Scouts and Catachan jungle fighters. Then we have a discussion on how to deal with big monsters. As you all know, Warhammer 4th edition was out at this point. Warhammer 4th and 5th edition were particularly notorious for being all about big heroes and big monsters. And so here is an article on how to deal with the potential threats of big monsters. Lovely image of a Genusty, the skull, and some bolter shells, and that's some kind of purity seal or something. I wish these were still at Warhammer World. I would have loved to have seen these artifacts. There was a bolter and there was a Terminator helmet. There is still a Terminator helmet at Warhammer World, but I think it's a different one. And of course the life-size Wolfguard Terminators and Chaos Marines and things. And a lizard man sort of autopsy scene, and it just sounds like there were so many cool things on display at Warhammer World at this time. But I did not. This one though actually is on. This is because this is on tour. This was currently at Nottingham store and touring around some of these stores, but they ended up, I believe, at Warhammer World. And yeah, I would have loved to have seen them when Warhammer World was slightly more than the big plastic battle scenes that it is now, which is a bit of a shame. Here we are looking at Golden Demon 95. So we were looking ahead to Golden Demon 91 with the last one. Here we are looking back to Golden Demon 95. Now we're in January 96. This was the first time that I'd encountered the idea of Golden Demon as a painting contest. I still wasn't really sure what it was. When I read through this article, I sort of thought maybe like these command groups and characters were being voted the best in the range, but they were not. These are painting competitions, of course. We know that now. This diorama, interestingly, this Orc outpost was up on eBay last year. Saw that. It must have been, if that was 95. My maths is rubbish. So what, 19 years after it won, it still looked in pretty good nick. The guy wanted a lot of money for it, and I'm not saying it was overvalued, but yeah, I don't think it sold, or if it did, it went on a private sale outside of the auction. So maybe it was a little optimistic as to its value. But there's some cool stuff in here. It may not be quite as weird and wacky and crazy as the 80s Golden Demon submissions, but there's still some cool conversion work going on here. Cool converted Viper jet bike here before the Viper kit came out. And some models that look a lot like copies of the models as they were presented in White Dwarf, and some that are very, very different, like the guy's raven on the back of his, on his shoulder here. Yes, quite a lot of kind of conversion work going in. The basing obviously has got a bit tamer. Don't think they were requiring it to go on Goblin Green bases at this point. Maybe they were. At one point they did say all entries needed to be on Goblin Green gaming bases, which was a bit of a shame. But there you go. They're all very bright, obviously, and of the era. This battle scene is cool. This looks a bit more like a kind of throwback to the 80s with this bony bridge. The gargoyles spewing blood into the river, and some older models scattered around. Lots of nice painting. I can't really tell what's painting and what surface texture on here. It'd be really cool to see this. If that still exists, it'd be cool to see that diorama. Here's a discussion on picking your scenarios. And how to play to your strengths when choosing scenarios in 40k, second edition 40k, of course. Another interview with Nigel Stillman, or I say another one, another interview, this time with Nigel Stillman, discussing how to build an army. So this is where he plans his monthly purchases and when he's going to paint each thing. it does seem like he's doing most of his painting on a Saturday, a Monday, and then a Friday evening, finishing it off. It's an ambitious paint scheme. I think if I looked at my own painting schedule, it probably wouldn't look quite as involved as that. But then I don't work for Games Workshop, so maybe it was part of his work to be able to do that. But anyway, in this case, he was planning how to buy and build a Dark Elf army in record quick time. You know, Nigel Stillman is very good at just building an army and getting on with it. Newsletters for Necromunda, journaling the progress of campaigns and the sort of scenario opportunities and things that are afforded in a journal, which would have been really cool if you'd played in a big enough Necromunda campaign for that to be a thing. I think I remember wanting to write some for the campaign that we were not playing with my gaming group at the time, or wanting to write a magazine anyway for our Warhammer battles that were kind of along this line, but we played maybe one a month, so there wasn't very much in the magazine. It lasted for I think a couple of months with photos that not photos, but yeah, some photos maybe, but mostly black and white images that I'd photocopied out of fighting fantasy books in the library and cut and pasted in back in the days when everything was done on a photocopier, because I was at school and that's what I had access to. Another Heavy Metal Masterclass from Mike McVeigh, excellent news. This time we are looking at, what are we looking at? Oh, this is questions. This is Q&A with Mike McVeigh. So you send in your questions and Mike answers them. But mostly in this, I seem to remember he's talking about painting skeletons with inks. He's talking about choosing base colours and edge highlighting on Space Marines. And then he's looking at this awesome diorama. This is another one from Golden Demon. And this one was certainly the last time I was there in the cabinet at Warhammer World. So it was really nice to have a look at this largely scratch-built diorama. There are a few Necromunda bulkhead pieces being used in the back here, but mostly this is all scratch-built. And when you understand that this was the open competition, so GW staff were allowed to enter, and this was Dave Andrews' entry, then it all becomes clear just how how this level of scratch building was gone to. But very cool. I like the non-combatant, although it's in a military plane, the sort of non-combat theming of that diorama is very cool. Here we talk about regular infantry in Epic. We've gone through a period where there have been lots of big monsters, Tyranid Bio Titans and new Chaos Titans, and big things and big vehicles. So we are returning here to appreciate the regular infantry stands and their capabilities in Epic at the time. Here's some general Q&A. It was a nice feature of White Dwarf. Not only were they putting out FAQs, but they were also having a write-in with general questions and answering them, which is a very useful thing for a games company to be doing. You get your authoritative answer. And we have another modelling workshop looking at gaming tables in general, good things to use on games tables, bad things to use on games tables, plans for making your own one piece. I'm familiar with this technique for making flattage for theatre scenery, so this is nothing particularly new, but I guess if you weren't used to the idea of battening a board to keep it flat and level, then that might be useful. I don't think many of us would be able to accommodate a table quite this size. That's got to be a studio table. And then we're looking at hills a little bit, polystyrene hills and layered cardboard hills covered with filler, which is mostly what I had at the time. I used this article quite a lot to make these sort of soggy corrugated cardboard hills. some lovely examples of hills and some very basic examples of hills. And then this modular terrain that I must have spent most of my time in front of this magazine looking at. Absolutely gorgeous. I think these are 2 foot by 1 foot modules. They're from the collection of the Perrys. I would love to see that craggy board. I would love to see that up close, see some more photos of that, see the actual size of it, see how it looks on the table, because I just, there's so much intricacy going on in there, there's so much detail going on in there. As a games piece, this really sort of caught my attention at the time. This is cool too, and here's you know, a big modular battlefield with some, I think, more historical terrain on it that doesn't look particularly Warhammerish. And this is cool, and these are 2 by 2. Oh no, it says this is a, sorry, it says this is a 2 by 4 piece, so actually this is much bigger. So again, yeah, I would love to see that as a 2 by 4 piece. That crag, that must be huge. Yeah, I don't know, that really appeals to me. I can't imagine it being that size. I can imagine that being a 2 by 1 looking at it, but being that big, yeah, I can't get my head around it. I'd love to see more pictures if they exist. Perrys, do you have, anyone know the Perrys? Anyone know if there are more pictures of this scenery around? I would love to see it if it still exists. Here's a bit from that Angels of Death Codex, which has just come out, looking at some Dark Angels specific characters. Commander Azrael, Ezekiel and Asmodai, or Asmodee, however you want to say it. The miniatures for which were released this month, and so the rules are in White Dwarf. And then here is that final raid battle report. You remember the scenarios were put out last month, and here's the playthrough of that final clash between orcs and dark elves as the battle report in the back of this White Dwarf, and it's fun. It's entertaining. It's not quite as entertaining as Scabby the Shaman popping out of his hut or not to smite one side or not, but it's a very entertaining battle report, and of course it looks glorious in all of its colour with its Pringles tube orc huts. And then you get to the catalogue pages. These are actually my ticks. There are a couple of ticks here and things that I've got in. Oh yes, I was going to collect all of these things. No, just this and this. Escher, some of the most beautiful models ever released, particularly for Necromunda. I have a bunch of these. I've painted them up. I like how they're painted, but I still don't think I've done justice to them. They're just such exquisitely fine sculpts, really beautiful things. Lots of Necromundering stuff, some wizards, those Dark Angels characters. Here, oh, we can compare, look. We can compare armour variants. This is another one of those weird 5 years apart and we have the same models in the catalogue pages. It's just really odd how often that happens. Let's have a look. So we don't actually have the Thunder Warrior in here. That's a previous version. The Mark II Crusade armour is quite different here, looking in a different direction. So there are 2 metal Mark II Crusade armour variants around. That's cool. The Mark III Iron is also quite different. The Mark IV Maximus, yeah, different pose. And the Mark V Heresy, yeah, that's also different. So different variants of each of those. So it would be possible to mix yourself a squad from those 2 different variants if they weren't frighteningly expensive. But these armour variants I still think are really cool. I would love the squad of those over and above the regular Space Marine armour that was around at the time. Some Valhallan Ice Warriors, and of course the Hellhound, and then the back of this much red and now rather tatty cover. Ooh, if you can see that, it's not too shiny. It is of course the Angels of Death, is the Blood Angels Death Company, and a big Blood Angels force fighting Tyranids, also recently released into the 40k world, or re-released. The new range just started coming out, so getting some interest in those with that on the back. Anyway, there we go. There's two issues, two 90s issues. Again, my apologies to the 80s issue fans. We will try and rectify this for next time, when I should have 3 issues to bring you. Next week we're going to be looking at something a bit different. We're going to be returning to something I did a while ago, looking at some independent miniature manufacturers that I perhaps missed when I did the last series of those, and charting some other things, some developments that have happened to some of the ones that I did cover. So that's what we'll be doing over the next few weeks. I hope you'll join me for that one, or for those, in fact. Have a nice time. Enjoy your New Year, if you're still on New Year celebrations. My commiserations if, like me, you are returning to work. I hope that's not too awful for you after the festive period. Maybe it'll be a nice break for you, who knows. Anyway, take care, and I shall see you next week.